Hi. Oh. Hi. Welcome back to French Crush. I'm your host, Amber Akilla. This is my podcast where I talk about stuff and things, cute, chaotic, and critical thinking. If you're a regular here, you know the drill. I have this shirt by my friend Lil, aka Flex Mummy. Avoid overthinking by not thinking. That is like the vibe for 2023, except for the fact that I constantly overthink and I just have to accept that maybe it's part of my personality and just something that I need to learn to manage. You know, I can get to a point of return to a place where I'm not thinking, even when I do overthink, you know. Got my little coffee. Please subscribe to the YouTube. I would really appreciate it if you enjoy the content. I'm going to keep uploading the audio. Oh my God, my face. To podcast platforms for people who listen when they're driving or listen when they're walking. I so can appreciate how that is an important part of your routine. Don't want to take that away from you, but I would also really appreciate it if you subscribed to the YouTube channel and like leave a comment, etc., when you can. Because I don't want to put ads in the podcast, but I want YouTube ad money eventually. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, okay? So I'm back in Shanghai. I was in Perth, my hometown, for like 2.5 weeks. It already feels like so long ago. I got back like maybe like a week and a half ago. I got back, was here for like a few days, and then I spent a day traveling to Seoul. I was in Seoul for 1 day and then another day traveling back. Usually it only takes 2 hours to fly from Shanghai to Seoul. Like there was a point in my life pre-pandemic when I was living in Shanghai, and I'd probably been to Seoul more times than I had been to Sydney in Australia, you know. If you're familiar with Australian geography, I'm from the west of Australia, the southwest in Perth, and Sydney, Melbourne are like major cities on the east coast. And I've probably been to Seoul more than I've been to those places. And I've only lived in China for like 3% of my life. So yeah, it was great to go back to Seoul. I hadn't been there for a long time. Last time was like 2019. But all the direct flights were sold out. And I was going for work, and then client sort of like insisted that I try to make it over there. They were paying, obviously, so it was great. But I had to stop in Taipei for an hour and then fly from Taipei to Seoul. But it was like I had to go south and then north again. So Sunday, I left in the morning, got to Seoul in the evening. Incheon Airport is like the further away airport. It's so far from the city centre. So I took like the subway / metro into next to the hotel in Gangnam, which is like the other side of Seoul. But it was great because the hotel was literally like outside of the subway station. And then had a day, met with clients. Then next morning, went to the airport, transferred in Taiwan, got back to Shanghai in the evening. That was on Wednesday. Now it's Friday. So I'm a little bit out of it. And then tomorrow, I'm going to Chengdu, which is in central China, where pandas and hot pot are from. And I went last year to DJ. I'm going to DJ again. I'm excited. I have a friend that's going to come with me. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I'm not used to this kind of travel, or because I was literally living in like a 5 to 10 kilometer radius of my childhood home for 2.5 years. And previously when I was in Shanghai, I was traveling like every 3 to 6 weeks. I would go somewhere, and yeah, it's such a privilege to be able to travel, and I'm very grateful that I'm able to do that now. And I think it's crazy how like we haven't really learnt anything from the pandemic when it comes to the environment and, you know, the way that we move around. But, you know, I didn't travel for like 2.5 years, so I think a little travel here and there for me now is okay. And I'm very grateful that I have the opportunity to do that. I'm working on like getting all the little things and like routines that I need so that I can make travel a more seamless process, or as seamless as I can make it. So I'm like testing different makeup bags. This is one version. Rose away, no man's land. That's what it says on it. Don't have very strong feelings towards this particular shape so far, but slightly more convenient than the ones I was using before. Yeah, I'm sorry, I haven't really like introduced the topic of today's episode. It's a combination of like just my thoughts, things I've been thinking about recently, things that have been happening. And then also I'm going to answer a question about like working and collaborating that I got. So I think it's a great question. I'm going to do my best to like provide some perspective as I do, because as I like to say, I'm really not here to like tell people what to think or how to think. I'm only going to share like my perspective and my point of view, which is constantly developing and evolving. And I think it's really important to give yourself the space to do that. You know, you don't have to have an answer all the time, and like whatever answer you come to, be open to that changing. And that was kind of like the theme of the last episode, you know, like normalize just having no fucking idea, you know, or like being in the process of figuring something out, because I think that's when you're able to expand your perspective, your empathy as well, and then also your experience, because you become open to new things. And everyone's like process of doing that is going to be slightly different, but I think that, yeah, I'm not trying to like tell people what to think. I'm just sharing my point of view, the process that I go through thinking about certain things, which is obviously filtered through my own lens and my own experience, which I'm also like reminding myself to own and take ownership of, because I think that when you have a point of view that's maybe not represented that much, you can feel like there's no space for your point of view, or like you're somehow wrong. But I feel like I've learned that not thinking exactly the same as everybody else has value, you know? And it can be challenging because maybe you might not feel like as explicitly validated, but I don't care. You know, I think that I've listened to a lot of people say very problematic, ignorant things in my life, in my presence, to me. And I'm just like, I'm not trying to do any of that. I just want to like mind my own business and live my life and have fun and encourage other people to do so. And I don't think that that's a crime. Oh my God, my brows are looking so fucked. I'm trying to decide if I want to bleach them again and when would be the best time to do it, because I do enjoy like the alien look. I'm going to keep going back to like the way that I'm processing that time in Perth, because I'm still processing in a way, you know. It hasn't even been a full year yet, and I think it will take me like 2 years to feel like I have like a new self, feel like I've grown into a new self, because it's definitely not an overnight process. I mean, I've noticed that I've changed a lot, and whoever I was when I was in Shanghai before is not who I am now. And not necessarily in like obvious ways, but to me, I feel like I don't even remember how I used to think before. Obviously, it's like based on the same thing, but it's still very different. I don't know. It's just like a lot of conflicting thoughts and emotions that I'm trying to work through. Even I feel like when I saw my therapist in Perth, she was like, "Why are you crying?" And I was like, "I don't really know. Like, it's not like I'm sad. I think I'm just like overwhelmed. I'm like so happy and grateful, but then maybe also like a part of me is like grieving something. I'm not entirely sure what. But it's great. You know, I cry when I read like political books that talk about really fucked up historical events. So I think that's just like who I am. But yeah, I think recently I've been reminding myself to just embrace like my own path and my own journey, because that's what I would tell anybody who comes to me and says that they feel like they're not as far along in their life as they expected to be, or they want to be, or they find themselves comparing themselves to other people. And I always tell people, like, you know, everyone is on their own journey, on their own timeline, based on their own context. There are things that are going to be coming your way that you can't predict. And also what I realized recently, because I think I have this like kind of like betrayal trauma. I think that's why. Something that I'm like processing. Some kind of like betrayal trauma has been unearthed from my Pandora's box. From the Pandora's box in the back of my mind. And in the process of like pondering and processing this, what I have like reminded myself or like tried to accept, because I think when you've been betrayed by different people in your life, or you feel betrayed, you wonder like what you could have done differently to avoid that outcome, you know? Or you think about what you did and what you were thinking at the time, and maybe what you missed and any blind spots that you had. How can you avoid the same thing happening again? And it's like a balance of things, because it's like on the one hand, you still need to like learn from that experience. There are maybe like certain boundaries that you could assert better, or, you know, you want to be able to trust yourself more. Maybe you placed too much trust in an external source, and rather than like really owning what your intuition was telling you, or, you know, the red flags that you just like overlooked. But then at the same time, being able to accept that you could still make all the right decisions and do the best that you can and still get fucked. Because that's just life. You know, you actually can't control how other people are going to treat you. And this has shown up in like so many times in my life, because so often I'm literally just like minding my own business, doing my own thing, and someone comes along and insists that I have to like placate them or do what they want or reimagine myself in their image, when they've done literally nothing to create a rapport or like value to me for me to think that that's something that I should do. And I think that's something that I've struggled with a lot, because it started happening when I was very young. And then it kind of leaves this like impression on you where you question your own decision making and your own view, because there's always someone that's telling you what you think is wrong or what you think is not acceptable according to them. But like, you don't even have enough in common with that person to really care about what they think, or to even like for them to even tell you that what they're doing is better than what you're doing. Like, anyway, basically, my point is, you could do everything right. You could objectively be the most empathetic, consider all the different options, and there's still going to be things that you can't predict. There's still going to be things that you can't control. And ultimately, I think that just can give you maybe a sense of reassurance in that it's better to just make a decision, you know, the most informed decision that you can, and then pick a direction, you know, and figure it out as you go. It's like when I talk to women versus men, generally, when it comes to how they consider like options for them in their career and in life, men always say to me, directly or indirectly, that you just like take the job and then figure it out as you do it. You know, you don't feel like you need to be fully qualified for something in order to accept it which is so different to how women think generally, because women are going to think like, oh, I need to know exactly how to execute something in order to say that I can do it. But that's not always the case. You know, you don't want to do something that you're completely unqualified for. Like, I'm not going to say, yeah, I can do a brain surgery for you, but there are going to be like situations where people are offering me opportunities that maybe I'm not like super well versed in, but I have a general idea of. I can do research, and then in the process of that job, I can ask questions, I can consult like people that are more experienced than me, and as a result, I become qualified. And then the next job that I have, I can confidently say that I know how to do X thing, and then, you know, build from that. Because, and that's kind of like an approach that you can take to life. And I think, you know, sometimes men, they will say that they can do things, but not actually be open to learning how to do them properly in the process, which is bad, not bad, or like not ideal. So finding a balance between those things, right? And I think that that's kind of something that I need to remind myself of when like the trigger for that betrayal trauma comes up, because when I look back on like the situations that I think created that trigger, it's like I couldn't have done it differently, or it's like based on who I was at that time and where I was at, it's easier for me to say now, like I could have made a different decision. But there's so much that goes into decision making that's not just like rational. It's not so easy to separate your feelings from your decision making. And when you no longer feel a type of way that you did in the past, you can detach yourself from it and say, I should have made this or that decision. But I think being able to accept, you know, that you were overwhelmed at the time and a lot of other things were influencing you or whatever, like, I don't know. Basically, we always come back to radical acceptance, right? And how important that is. Easier said than done, though. But yeah, that's kind of like the thing that I've been reflecting on. It's like you could do everything right and there's still something that you didn't account for, or there's still things that you can't control because you are such a small part of this vast world and universe. And I think that, you know, that's the price, because some of the greatest things that happen to you, some of the like relationships and the experiences that you have will have such a profound impact on you in a positive way that you never could have predicted. And the kind of like yin and yang of that is that there are going to be things that happen to you that maybe have a negative impact on you that you can't predict for either. So this is just the nature of the world that we live in. Contrast is necessary for us to be able to appreciate those experiences, you know, like I never could have predicted that I would have ended up in Perth for 2.5 years. And I also couldn't have predicted the way that I would make it back to Shanghai. But I can appreciate those experiences for what they are, in spite of like the difficulty that I experienced in having to go through them and having to process them. And I think like knowing, it's like freeing but also terrifying when you think of it in that way, you know, like you could consider all of the options and the one that you pick is like a uphill battle that you didn't prepare for. But in the process of that, that's how you learn, that's how you grow, and that's how you develop a strength of character, you know, like weak men are created in good times or something. Good times create weak men. And I think that I'm who I am because of the challenges that I've faced in my life, in spite of the privilege that I might have had. And I've also been thinking about like the different intersections of privilege, and how it's really just not like black and white, you know. And this is like a topic that I really want to explore more, but I just haven't really been able to like properly articulate it, because I think it's important to consider from like a political point of view in a way, and then also just like social dynamics, etc. Because social dynamics, and then also in your like personal spiritual development and growth, because I feel like as someone who was like an ethnic minority in the context that I grew up in, but I was also like materially privileged, I see the way that like even with all the privilege in the world, you're not necessarily, that doesn't guarantee happiness. It doesn't guarantee a sense of self-empowerment. And I think ultimately it's finding a balance between these two things, being able to have your basic needs met, being able to have a little extra money so that you can have fun, so that you can have a sense of security, but then also having the tools and the resources to be like spiritually, emotionally empowered so that you can then contribute positively to the people around you, because there are lots of people that have amassed and hoarded all of this wealth and privilege and they're not satisfied with their lives, and the way that they conduct themselves is to just maintain their position of power rather than consider the ways that they could have like a positive impact in the lives of others, you know, people that aren't just like themselves. Because yeah, I've met a lot of really stingy rich people. And obviously, like, you don't necessarily get rich by sharing. But I think that, you know, people who are rich are in a better position to share than people who aren't. And I find that some of the most generous people are the people who don't come from like all of this privilege. And I think that it's like also trying not to feel guilty about the privilege that you have in a way that stops you from being able to consider the opportunities that privilege gives you. You know, I think I've also met people who have privilege and they feel guilty about it, and then they don't have like a healthy way of dealing with it. Yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's also something I've been thinking about recently. Because something else that I've been thinking about recently is just like the history of sinophobia in the West, as someone who like grew up Chinese in Australia, a very like white, isolated suburban area. And then as an adult, traveled to and from China, lives in China, works in China. You know, I can see, and then with all like the current geopolitical tensions, it's just like interesting to see how white supremacy is such a core value in Western society that you don't really ever get an opportunity to question, because like the media is always positioning like the West as like the moral pinnacle, you know, or the moral police, or this ideological hierarchy where the West is superior. And this is something that can permeate people of any race. You know, you don't have to be white to uphold white supremacy values and to like encourage white supremacist practices, you know. So yeah, it's very overwhelming to think about that, honestly. Like when you start to scratch the surface of Western imperialism in history and in like current politics, that's a real can of worms, let me tell you. So for me, I recognize that there are political issues in every country because there are humans in every country, and humans are just inherently problematic, and men and the patriarchy especially is driven by like fear of pain, fear of difficulty, and like fear of threat to authority. So I don't want to be a politician, but I think that in understanding my own journey and how I understand my place in the world, and then like the types of ideas and values that I want to embody, practice, represent, it's important for me to understand how those dynamics have shaped the worldview that I grew up in and the worldview that I can now like take responsibility for. So yeah, that's my thoughts recently, and I want to share more thoughts. There's so many thoughts. I can't believe it that I have so many. Sometimes I just wonder if my brain will like explode and I would have nothing left to say. I'm going to share this message that I received, and then some thoughts. So, after finding you on TikTok this past fall, I've been listening to every episode of Friend Crush. I love hearing your perspectives on life, and I think they're quite unique compared to much of what we've been hearing online. Friend Crush has truly been life-changing for me. Thank you for the recommendation for the 6 pillars of self-esteem. The first half is pretty much my Bible at this point. I'm curious to hear your opinion about this situation that happened at work the other day. It feels significant, and I have been considering what it means about me and my self-esteem. I just started working on a new project with 2 others. Both of them felt relieved to be taking a break from their personal projects to work on this new one because they feel less pressure to be perfect when working on a project that is not their own. I feel the exact opposite and feel much more stress and anxiety working on someone else's project as opposed to my own personal projects. One aspect of this is that if I were to make mistakes, I would rather have those mistakes negatively impact the outcome of my own project versus negatively impacting the outcome of someone else's project. I'm also worried about what this says regarding people-pleasing tendencies and all the value I place on my own projects versus other people's. Wondering where you stand on this in your own life and what you make of it. Thank you for your opinion. Thank you for this thought-provoking question because I think it's great. And I think that for me and my experience working in the creative industry and my observations is that there ultimately is going to be a balance between your personal work and your commercial work, and how that manifests for each person is going to be slightly different. Maybe it's you work a corporate job and then you have your own hobbies on the side. That's your personal work. Maybe your personal and your professional work exist in the same realm, and then you do commercial branded opportunities, but then you also try to spend time coming up with your own concepts and executing those. And I'm not sure how this would relate to self-esteem specifically, but I think that tying back to the things I was saying at the beginning of this episode is that regardless of whether you're working on a personal project or whether you're working on a commercial project or a collaborative one, I think it's important to be open to different possibilities, and the initial concept that you started with may be developing and growing as time goes on, Like I mentioned, I think in a previous episode, a project I'm working on that is collaborative. There's different sort of people involved with different roles, and originally the deadline was January and now it's March, and the project still hasn't been wrapped. And I think that I needed to be flexible in terms of how long this project might take. So has everybody else. And then also the initial idea that we had has evolved and developed into something different as time has gone on. And part of being an effective creative or worker of any kind is being able to be adaptable to the external things that you can't control. And I think that when you are working with other people, you need to be able to find a balance between asserting your point of view because you've been hired for a reason, but then also finding how you can balance that with the collective interests of the project and the rest of the team. So I can understand why for the other people that are working on this project, they're relieved that they don't have to make the final call on everything because it's not their project. When you have a client, ultimately the client is going to be making the final decision. And in my experience, it's not always going to be in a perfect alignment with what you think is best for them, because especially when you've been hired to do the creative, the client is going to have to balance that with commercial interests. And usually commercial interests, there's just a very small intersection between creative interests and commercial interests. Sometimes you can hit that sweet spot in the middle, and sometimes it might have to skew a little more towards commercial. Usually for your personal projects, it can skew more towards the creative side. And if you're lucky, it will return in a circle and give you commercial opportunities. But I think that being able to just relinquish the idea of having full control over outcomes in your life and also in these types of work is helpful, because it doesn't help you to stress over like the commercial aspect that like the client is responsible for. Like, you can pitch the best creative that you can, and then they'll find a way to water it down to meet their commercial needs. And if it doesn't turn out the way that you expected, I think as long as the client is like generally happy or can accept that, you know, they made final decisions that maybe skewed the creative in a direction that ultimately didn't have like the best outcome for them, that's on them, you know, it's not on you. And I always try to be clear in my communication with clients to give them like the best insight or ideas that I can. And then if they push back and say, well, we think that this can't be because we're trying to meet this need, blah, 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 I'll say, okay, if that's the case, then we can adjust. And then kind of like word things in a way that's like, that's your idea and you need to take responsibility for it when it comes to the final outcome, because I don't want this to blow back on me because I've already told you what I think. And I'm not going to like fully discredit someone just because they don't have the same point of view as me. But I think it's important to like distinguish like, okay, this is my point of view. That's your point of view. We're finding a way to combine the two. This is what I think will happen. But I can respect that like you have interests and you have insights that I don't have from a commercial point of view. My expertise is like the creative point of view. And then, you know, if you're working with someone who is respectful, they will understand that and then they'll make that final decision. And I think when it comes to doing your personal projects, like I feel like sometimes, I don't know, anxiety can hit from any direction for me. Sometimes I'm working on a like commercial project and I'll get like really caught up on like some kind of detail that maybe isn't my responsibility. Sometimes I'll get really caught up on detail that is my responsibility and I'm worried I'm not making the right decision, but I will still try to communicate and say, okay, my point of view right now is like, this is what would be most effective, or this is the best way that we can combine like your interests commercially with like a creative idea. And then other times it'll be like a personal project where I'm trying to like do something and I just freak out and think I'm going to say or do the wrong thing. Like I have that a lot. I've had that a lot with the podcast before, where I'm just like, I don't really know what I'm thinking or what I'm trying to achieve here. Or I think that like every episode has to be like the best episode ever. But I sort of accept now that, you know, some episodes are going to resonate with some people, other episodes aren't going to resonate with people so much. And you never know like who you might help or be able to like impact in a positive way, even with the things that maybe don't hit so hard, you know? And I think it's like important to continue to create and explore your ideas, even if they don't come out to like the highest possible standard that you can imagine, because it might be exactly what someone needs to see or needs to engage with. You just can't predict that, you know? The point of view expressed in the question is like so valid and so normal, but it's about like finding a balance between those things, because ultimately you can just do your best. And then, like I said, things could go great, things could go shit, things could go somewhere in the middle, things could start off one direction and end up in another direction. Okay, and then like a kind of like tenuous connection that I'm making. And this is like very surface level observation and also a generalization, because, you know, egotistical people exist in all cultures. But I think that when I'm like talking to or working with certain people from a Western background, there is this idea, and I don't even mean like that they have to be white, because I also work with like people of color that have grown up in the West. But there is this idea of like someone having full total control, and it being like, there's always someone who's like, it has to be my idea. It has to be my point of view that comes out on top, because the individualism has like really gotten a hold of them. On the one hand, it's like they want full control. So that's kind of like a way that it will manifest in like dominant expression. And then the opposite is like someone will take full responsibility. And maybe that's kind of what's happening in this question that I received, because you're working with other people, but like any mistake that occurs, you're taking full responsibility for. But you're working with other people, so they're also like vouching for your point of view or like the quote unquote like mistake that occurs. So I think being able to pull back a little bit and acknowledge that when you're working in a team, you want to have space for everyone's point of view and then find like a kind of combination that works the best for the project. And you don't need to like vehemently insist on your own direction and then take full responsibility for any mistake that happens, because the point of working in a team is that you have like a combination of those things, unless it is something that requires you to have final say. But in this example, it's like you're working with other people and it's not like they're executing your vision. You're kind of like coming together with a vision. So then when it comes to working on your own projects, it's like you just never know if something's going to slay or flop. You can do your best and see what happens. And then you always have another opportunity to like make up for a flop or to continue slaying or to go into a flop era and then start slaying again. You know, it's just like there is no certainty in life anymore, is how I feel. And I think like that's why it's so difficult, because on the one hand, like everyone's talking shit about everyone and we're all like learning from each other, observing, judging, not judging, critical. But then we also have to like recognize that people are going to talk shit about you when you're trying to do your own thing. There's going to be people that are cheering you on and there's going to be people that are waiting for your downfall. And that's just life, you know? And it's difficult to find a balance between those two things. I think especially as women, we just haven't been conditioned to have the audacity, to be honest. But it can be learned, because I'm definitely not someone that was born with audacity. And I still don't think I'm at like my full audacious level, but we've made many improvements. Because, you know, I have a podcast, and this is stereotypically something that is associated with like straight white guys who sit around spreading toxic ideas. And for the most part, I think that my podcast has at least like neutrally or positively impacted the lives of people that have come in contact with it. So I feel grateful that audacity has allowed me to positively contribute to the lives of others in some way. But yeah, I think that there's a balance that you can strike when doing creative work, doing work of any kind, whether it's by yourself, for your own project, or collaboratively with other people. It can't, you know, like while we have to take responsibility for our own lives and decisions, etc., it's not like it's your fault that something goes wrong if you weren't like insistent on having other people disenfranchised in the process of you doing something. You know what I mean? But I think that when you become aware of how you might have negatively impacted someone or maybe made a mistake and you try to learn from it and you take accountability for it, that is what is most important, you know? And separate to this idea, but somehow connected, is like when I talk to people about, you know, the role that white supremacy and the West has played in, you know, just like the exploitation of people of color all over the world in varying degrees. And I think that it's not about choosing a political system or ideology that is better or like morally good, because I think that every system is going to have its own flaws, and ultimately it's the people who are executing that should be held accountable, not the ideology itself. But it's like the lack of consideration and the lack of acknowledgement that people who insist on a specific worldview have, the lack of acknowledgement for how they've gotten there, you know? Like privilege comes at a huge cost, obviously not to the people who have the privilege, but to the people who have been exploited in the process of that privilege coming to be. I'm not seeing many like totally equitable societies at the moment. And if there are, they're very small. So it's difficult to work on like a larger scale, or humans haven't quite figured out a way to do that yet. And I think that it's not that you can't want to, it's not that you don't want to protect your position and what you have, but it's important to acknowledge how you've gotten it if you want to insist on maintaining that position. You know what I mean? Like, don't pretend that you didn't make certain decisions or that you didn't benefit from certain things that required other people to suffer for you to have privilege, and then make it seem like those things didn't happen while you continue to try to assert that position. Honestly, look, I haven't fully just figured out how I'm going to express these ideas, but it's just like the beginning. And once again, I've gone on a tangent. But, if you make a mistake in a group project or a project of any kind, as long as you can recognize for yourself, okay, I insisted on this too hard. Maybe I could have done things differently. Next project, I'm going to learn and do better rather than doing the same thing and making the same mistake. Because that's what most people do. No time for reflection. And there are people who are in positions where they don't have the privilege of time for reflection, but there are people with privilege, plenty of time to reflect, and they don't. And I think that's why the world is such a shit place sometimes, But we live, we laugh, we learn, and we slay. I'm sorry, this episode was honestly a ramble. The sound of the drilling outside was really getting to me. I hope it doesn't get to you too much. I'm going to see in the edit if I can remove some of the noise. But yeah, thank you for tuning in. Be in touch. I really appreciate the messages that people send me, telling me how the podcast has impacted their life. I'm going to read you one right now because it really made my day. I was struggling this morning. My BF introduced me to your account 2 years ago while I was in the biggest slump. I started listening to Friend Crush almost religiously since then. Your podcast has accompanied me through so many of my silly little walks, I've lost count. Re-listened to an episode recently and got emotional realizing that Friend Crush has truly become a staple in my self-care routine. I just wanted to say thank you for being easily one of my favorite people in the entire World Wide Web. I'm so grateful for the time and effort you put into each episode. You have no idea. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I think that sometimes I just can't even believe that someone would write this to me. It almost feels like made up, but I can't thank you enough. I'm going to keep doing my best with episodes and trying to just organize my thoughts in a semi-coherent way, even though sometimes I wish I could say 3 different things at one time to illustrate my point. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. But yeah, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. Keep being hot and having fun. Drink lots of water. Tell your friends and family that you love them. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok. Follow the podcast. Subscribe to my YouTube. I'll speak to you soon. Love you.